Okay, let's return back to mixed martial arts. Let me ask the ridiculous question of who do you think are the top three, maybe top five greatest fighters of all time?
It's so hard to compare fighters across generations.
And maybe one way to say it is which metrics would you put on the table as to measure what a great fighter is?
There was a guy named Dioxipus in the
Okay.
4th century,
Yeah.
and he was such a badass that in the Olympics in 336 BC, no one even showed up to fight him in the pancration event. Nobody even showed up because he was fucking everybody up.
Yeah.
Years later, he was retired. And this crazy Macedonian dude came. They were at some dinner for, Alexander the Great. Everyone's chilling, drinking, whatever they were drinking out of their chalices. And this Macedonian dude threatened him and challenged him. So Dioxipus said, yeah, man, we'll throw down. And, they set the time and the place. Macedonian dude comes out like body armor, spear, shield, all this other shit. Dioxipus came out absolutely naked with a wooden club.
Mm-hmm.
And took on this much younger guy, beat the living crap out of him, and then put his foot on his throat, and then didn't even kill him in a show of ultimate power for the time. So I think
There's something about the guy being naked too is just extra demeaning.
extra demeaning. Yeah.
Okay, can we rephrase the question then? Because those are clearly going to be some probably forgotten warriors in history. Let's take it to like modern day mixed martial arts in the UFC, perhaps. Well, just mixed martial arts. There, who do you think are the top fighters of all time? What metrics would you consider in trying to answer this perhaps unanswerable question?
I think one of the things you want to think about is strength of opponent at the time you fought them. So, for example, fighting BJ Penn in his prime and beating him is far different than beating BJ Penn last year, right? So to say you have a victory over BJ Penn is not the same given the time frame of when it happened. Not to take anything away from anyone who's beaten BJ Penn. Just use that as an example of someone whose career went into a different direction.
Yes.
I would say the guy who I think is probably the best that people are the least familiar with would be Murilo Bustamante. And I think he was a guy who was one of the guys with the first really good physical build for MMA, which I think is narrow from the chest to the back and long shoulder to shoulder and kind of sinewy made out of steel cable. That was a guy who could box.
Uh-huh.
That was a guy who could wrestle.
Yeah.
And that was a guy who had great jujitsu.
Yeah.
He wasn't a great kickboxer, but at the time he didn't need it. Fought everybody and gave everybody a run. I think he's probably one of those guys who's got to be considered.
Yeah, there's a few killers that never, because like, why is he not in the discussion? Because like, I think greatness requires both the skill and the opportunity to meet each other.
And when you talk about a fighter, the other thing that really a good fighter needs to become great is a foil.
Yeah.
And so many fighters don't have a foil. That's one of the biggest attractions, I think, of early Mike Tyson's career. He didn't have a foil. He had no one driving him. And by the time he had a foil in Holyfield, his career was in a different place.
But he's one of the greats of all time, and he never really had a foil. So his greatness was in the unparalleled destruction of like nobody's.
Right.
Well, of lesser opponents.
Right. And so when people debate the level of greatness of Mike Tyson, that's one of the things they say. Like, he didn't fight a lot of killers in their prime. I think you've obviously got to say in that conversation, I have a really difficult time keeping George St. Pierre out of the conversation. Only because he was able to beat you with anything. He could out jab you, he could out wrestle you, and he could submit you. The problem I have with Fedor is his career also took a drastic turn towards the end. And when he was fighting in Pride, he was doing a lot more grappling, and then he just started casting that overhand right at people.
Mm-hmm.
And his game kind of changed at that point. You can't take anything away from his greatness, but at that time, the great heavyweights were not really in fighting in Pride, and they didn't really exist yet. And by the time he fought a really good one, Fabricio Verdum, he did get submitted there.
Does his later performance color your and our perception of his greatness? Like in general about fighters?
Not mine, but I'm someone who's like intimately involved in the sport, but it colors everyone else's. Same with Anderson Silva. Like, I don't think Anderson Silva doesn't want to fight in like 7 years or something, or he's like one, like that's a guy who in his prime was one of the best fighters.
Is he in the top 5 for you?
I think he's probably in the top 5. Yeah.
Greatest striker of all time or no?
In MMA
And in mixed martial arts?
In mixed martial arts. That's a tough question. The greatest MMA striker of all time.
Because like the timing, we were talking about foot sweeps, right?
Yeah.
Who makes it look easier than Anderson Silva?
I think in an incredibly short sample of his prime, it's got to be Anderson Silva. And I think you have to consider discussing Lyoto Machida for his unbelievable manipulation of distance.
Yeah.
Which is something that people don't really talk too much about in terms of fighting, unless you're someone in the sport.
Yeah.
His use of distance and the ability to like what we call pop out, like and make you miss by 1 inch so that he could follow your fist back in as you retract it and then hit you over the top. That's a thing of beauty. Anderson Silva, when he became a counter striker, when he got to his prime in the UFC, that was a thing of beauty. That was a thing of beauty. So I think definitely those two guys, and Murilo Bustamante's got to be the third guy. There's just so many good guys now. It's just,
so where do you put in terms of metrics? You mentioned GSP and Anderson Silva. I think they have a large number of defenses of a title.
Mm-hmm.
Is that important to you? Like this kind of consistent domination?
No, because it's easily manipulated by the people making money off the fights. So there was a great quote one time when the UFC was coming to prominence, and Vince McMahon from the WWE, he said, you know, the difference between what we do and what the UFC does is that when we have a superstar, I can make sure he stays on top until he's no longer a superstar because we have predetermined results. Yeah. The UFC can't do that because they're actually having fights. Well, it's true and false. You can't do that, but you can give your superstars the most favorable matchups to keep them on top for the longest. So people always talk about title defenses as if the guy they're fighting, the challenger, is always the person most deserving of the shot. Yeah. And it's just not true. So I don't put that much stock in it.